Like butter scraped over too much bread, in the words of Bilbo Baggins. That's how I feel in regards to what they're doing with the appendices of The Return of the King and how they're attempting to spin 5 seasons of a show out of this tiny little portion of an otherwise massive trilogy, especially when the appendices section that they're pulling from regarding the Second Age is a tiny fraction of what's in those appendices. We're going to dive into that today. But before we do, if this is your first time here to the channel, I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfill. Welcome. If you like this video and you like these types of discussions, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell icon so you get more of the same. But I don't only do Rings of Power discussions here on the video. Make sure to check out the playlists. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on here. We do games, we do shows, we do books. I stream right now Lord of the Rings Online with our gaming community. We have a Discord. I'm an independent game developer working on a project with my wife and my brother. A whole slew of things. Check it all out. Links are all down below. Let's dive into today's discussion point. Now, for the purposes of this video, I downloaded a copy of the HarperCollins version of the 2010 Return of the King, and the thing that really gets me is one of the things that I loved years ago when I first read the Lord of the Rings books was getting into the appendices and getting to read about the additional storylines with Aragorn and Arwen and so on and so forth. But there's also some hints in here of some of the stuff that came before. So when we get into this, especially in Appendix A, we have this section on the Numenorian kings, um, and that goes for a little bit. It's not a lot. I mean, we're going to scroll down here and we're going to talk about this. And we get into this whole section. It's really only about that much, a few pages at most. And then we get into just a bunch of, genealogy stuff. Then we get a little bit about Eredor, Arnor, and the heirs of Isildur. A little bit more storyline here, a few pages worth. We continue to scroll down. This is more like getting some actual details here as we go on down through before we get to the tale of Aragorn and Arwen. So suddenly we're past all of the stuff that was leading up to the Third Age, and now we get beyond what's happening with Aragorn and Arwen. So really, when you come down to it, looking through here, the most important part of this is the first part of Appendix A, which talks about the Numenorians and that whole time period. Then we get to this section about the House of Eorl, which isn't really necessarily relevant to the story of the ring. This is more just about Rohan and everything that happened with Rohan. And then, of course, then we get to the Kings of the Mark, and we get more genealogy and all this other stuff. Then we get to Durin's folk, which this is part 3 of Appendix A, and there's some stuff in here that pertains to the First Age and the Second Age, but not a lot, and it's still just a small section when you look at the fact that this is part of Appendix A. Then we get to this line of kings, the line of the dwarves of Erebor, as was set out by Gimli Glenn's son for King Elisar. And then we get to the end of Appendix A. Appendix B really doesn't have anything. It's like an overview. It's like, look, here, the First Age ended with the Great Battle, when the host of Valinor broke. They're going to move over from Morgoth, and most of the Noldor returned to the far west, dwelt in Erisheim, the south of Valinor, blah, blah, blah. Second Age ended with the overthrow of Sauron, blah, blah, blah. Take it the One Ring. Third Age came to this, and then in the Fourth Age, Elder Days, blah, 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 blah. Now, there is some little bit of content here on the Second Age. A few paragraphs before we just get into what's basically an outline, right? And then we're to the Third Age, which doesn't have anything to do with what they're creating for the Rings of Power show. Everything we're talking about for the Rings of Power show is covering basically the Second Age, so to speak, because it's all about the Rings of Power and the creation of those rings, which is all sort of in this first section, so to speak, of this outline. Then we get into the Third Age, which the Third Age doesn't have any relevance on what we're reading through here. And then we keep scrolling down, and it's just timelines and things about the Third Age. Then we get to the fall of Barad-dûr, the end of the Third Age. It's just all outline stuff. And this is where I think, if you ask my opinion, Then we get into the further appendices, which don't have anything to do with anything. We get into Appendix C, it's all family trees, then it's the Shire calendar, then it's writing and spelling, then it's Appendix F, which is the language of people. So really the only section that is relevant to what they're building with the Rings of Power is the Annals of the Kings and Rulers, and Appendix B, which has a tale of the years, but only the first sections dealing with the first and second age, which are very, very brief. So even in the scope of the overall discussion of what is the Rings of Power covering? Well, it's covering the Second Age. And you hear the showrunners talking about how, well, we've got the rights to this, and we have all these clues that Tolkien left us, and we can use our paintbrush to paint within those lines, and as long as we don't touch anything from the Silmarillion and the history of Middle Earth and all the other stuff, we're fine. But here's the problem with that, or at least here's the problem that I have with that. Even in the scope of the appendices, which there is theoretically a lot there, the scope of the appendices in comparison to the rest of the Lord of the Rings series is very small. Lord of the Rings is 3 books, and this makes up. I mean, I don't have the copies are packed right now because we're moving, but in the scope of a book that's like this thick, it's like this much at the very end, and if you take the Return of the King and then add onto it the Two Towers, and then also you're looking at that's a bad analogy, but anyway, it's a tiny little section out of a great trilogy of books. There's not a lot there to base a 5-season arc off of in the first place. And then when you reduce the appendices down even further to the fact that they're really only pulling from Appendix A and a little bit from Appendix B, you're really left with this feeling, like Bilbo says, of it feels like it's stretched thin, like butter over too much bread. It's just one of those things that for me, I look at it and I say that for me, I don't see that they have enough here to pull off 5 seasons. I think if they would have taken the appendices and used that for season 1 of the Rings of Power and then covered, say the entirety of the Lord of the Rings and told us a different story of different things, there's a lot there to work with. But the fact that they're trying to retell the story of the making of the Rings of Power, all of these things of which are detailed greatly in the history of Middle Earth and the Silmarillion and everything else, trying to pull from this tiny little section of a book that you have the rights to while not being able to touch all of the rich history that's already been written is for me the great travesty of this, because I just don't see how you're going to get 5 seasons worth of a story out of this tiny little section that you have the rights to without painting really broad strokes, and just inventing stuff along the way, which we've seen they've been willing to do in any case. They're making up characters, they're gender swapping, they're doing all this stuff. They're creating gender confused characters, they're creating storylines that never existed in the books, like Galadriel being like Xena the warrior princess and meeting some human on a raft in the middle of a sea and climbing an ice wall and all this other stuff. Like they're just injecting so much fantasy into what is already a fantastical telling, and also taking that timeline of thousands of years and compressing it into a very short time frame. I'm still, like I said, I have yet to see anything that compels me to believe that the Rings of Power is going to be anything other than a fiasco. Um, there's still a part of me. I will, of course, watch it because my wife is going to watch it, having never read the books, and so I will watch alongside Chris. But I'm still going to be watching from the perspective of, let's see how bad of a train wreck this really is going to be based on what we're seeing so far. I just don't think that they have enough material to flesh out over 5 seasons, and it feels to me like they're already going into it trying to take a tiny little sliver of butter, excuse me, and spread it out over a whole loaf of bread when it's only enough butter for one piece. Just my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments down in the section below. If you like this video, don't forget to smash that like button. And of course, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you get future updates as I continue to talk about the Rings of Power, Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, Narnia, and so on and so forth. As we get deeper into the year, more stuff on the Wheel of Time and all that good stuff. Don't forget you can join our Discord. Links are down below. And if you want to support the channel, you can always check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/wandering hermits. Hopefully you're entertained this week, everybody, and I'll be around next week with more Rings of Power discussions and beyond. Stay safe.